She must have heard the campanile or something. Well, we should get underway. Welcome, everyone. Good to have you with us. Good to see you and you folks here. It's great. So, yeah, we're talking about overcoming anger, and the source for what I'm talking about is harkens back quite a ways back to the 8th century in India, as this text by Shantideva. Shanti means peace, and Deva means like divine. So his name would be kind of like divine peace is his name. And so he wrote this text, or composed this text way back when, in 10 chapters, and its overall arc, right, is enlightenment, basically. But in particular, the first 3 chapters are about giving rise to what in Sanskrit they say bodhicitta, or this mind of enlightenment, which is this mind set that where our whole reason for being and our intent and the whole thing is to attain the level of Buddha for the benefit of all living beings. Yeah, so it's a very unique kind of thought, right? Most of the time we're just thinking about our needs and getting through the day and such like that. So bodhicitta is actually very special. So the first 3 chapters are about giving rise to bodhicitta where it hasn't been before, yeah? And then the 3, then chapters 4, 5, and 6 deal with how to sustain and protect this bodhicitta. And that's where this chapter on patience or overcoming anger fits in, yeah? And then there are 3 chapters that talk about causing this mind of enlightenment to grow stronger, bigger, more vast through the practices of vigorous effort and meditation and wisdom. And then there's the 10th chapter, which is this very, very beautiful poetic dedication of merit. Yeah, so that's the context, of where this this teaching comes from. And I was asked to do this little talk because the person who was going to do the talk suddenly couldn't do it, so I just had to pull something sort of off the shelf. I gave this talk maybe a year and a half ago, so it's still kind of fresh, I hope. And maybe you were here that first time, but this topic of overcoming anger, it seems to be a popular one. It seems like maybe everybody kind of has some anger issues, maybe. And so that's how the chapter starts off, is Shantideva illuminates, to ask us to look sort of introspectively to our own experience of suffering that has resulted from the manifestations of anger, right? And so this is fairly easy for us to do because we all know how relationships are maybe one of the most beautiful but also one of the most challenging aspects of human life, right? And how harsh words or blowing up at somebody can cause such deep damage and suffering, both for them at the receiving end, or if we're at the receiving end, or even if we're the one who is dispensing the harsh words. It's suffering for us too. It's just suffering for everybody involved whenever this dynamic energy of anger is unleashed. So he starts by asking us to really reflect deeply about the damage that anger has caused in our lives in the past. And so that gets us in touch on a more feelingful level. So this really is not, although it's deeply the whole context of Shantideva's teaching was in the context of Nalanda University, very high academic, intellectual, setting, but it's not in any way divorced from our immediate personal experience of suffering, which is, I think, true of all the Buddha Dharma actually. It's all centered around the issue of suffering, and acknowledging that, and then working with it. So he then goes on, after we kind of touch base, a little bit with the damage that anger has caused in our own personal experience. Then he goes on to say, we need to recalibrate or rethink, because usually when someone makes us angry, right, it's like they're the bad guy, right? They're like the enemy. They're the ones that are acting badly and getting me upset, right? And so we focus on that person or that group, the offenders, whoever it is that is driving us nuts. And he takes a very radically different approach. He says what you need to do instead is to recognize that the enemy is not that person or that group of persons, but the enemy is your own anger itself, right? That you can't control what's going on with other people anyway, right? And so he really shifts the focus to say, don't get all into it with the other person, but to focus your intelligence and your effort in preserving and protecting bodhicitta, to focus on the anger that you have as being that which is problematic, or that is the enemy, or that that's what you need to focus on to really make to get some real results. Yeah, so that's I think very interesting. So instead of oh, that guy, that son of a gun, it's like, oh no, you have to focus on the anger internally. Yeah. And then he goes into this many verses talking about, well, anger just doesn't come out of nowhere. Well, in a sense it does, but it has as its breeding ground or potentiality our general sense of lack, or our general sense of discontent, right? If we are robust and happy and hitting all cylinders, whatever, we can just like blow through it, right? But if we're already kind of in an entropic, low energy space, discontented, that makes us liable, or we have this real strong propensity, so that if anything provokes us when we're in that kind of mindset, then our anger can really surface, right? So he spends a lot of time talking about recognizing that we have this lack of cheerfulness, we might say. And one of the verses says, don't let anything disrupt your sense of cheerfulness. That we need to cultivate a kind of a, how shall I say, sort of a buffer or a cushion, so that things don't get under our skin quite so easily. So I just say we have to take care not only of our embodiment, our body, but we have to take care of our mental, our mind sphere, And for me, lately, it's been a couple of months, what gets me is, tuning into, the news, going onto YouTube and looking at the latest podcast thingy-majiggy. And of course, I think it's very important to take some interest in all of these things, but we also need to be self-protective in some sense in this context, right? Of maintaining, our sense of positive mindset, our sense of cheerfulness, lest we become, more prone to this highly destructive anger that we know is so destructive just from our life experience. So for me, and it's really hard, because I don't know, I guess it was the pandemic, when you were just stuck at home, and I got into this habit of going online a lot, right? And I'm finding it very hard to wean myself away from that. It's like a very strong sort of magnetic pull, and I go back and I check and da, 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 da. But, I was thinking about it, my life, I'm retired now, right? And I have a very nice apartment, it kind of looks over the bay, and it has this beautiful garden, and everything's just like, the birds are singing, and now the spring flowers are coming. And what am I doing to myself, right? When I go back, and when I flip open my laptop yet again, to kind of let in what is, a lot of very toxic stuff, right? So in this, I've just been thinking about this a little bit, not very deeply, but in the context of what Shantideva is saying in terms of sustaining this sense of positivity and this cheerfulness and such, to really look, if you can, to see what it is that is making you glum, right? And maybe you can just like dial that back a little bit, right? That's all. It's just, but like I say, it's very, I don't know, those algorithms, I think it's the algorithms. Somehow they get under your skin, and they just know just how to hook you. You have to be I think we have to be very careful. Anyway, and then he goes on to say that, that one trains oneself in these kind of disciplines of, sustaining the sense of cheerfulness and being less vulnerable to having angry responses, that we do so very kind of intelligently and gently, kindly, and most importantly, perhaps gradually, right? That, we can't be, it's so easy to be, on the whole spiritual path stuff, to be very sort of self-critical and self-judgmental, right? And so he talks about, you train your mind gradually, right? And that is really important, but also implicit in there is this notion that mind actually is trainable, right? And that's like a huge thing in Buddhist practice. We talk about lojong, or mind training, right? To sort of rewire things and re-engage in a completely new and different way than our habitual patterns. And sometimes it may be kind of discouraging because, our habit patterns are so strong, right? And it seems like we're not really progressing with any sort of commitment we might have to ourselves to make things better. So, he's very compassionate, very kind. He says, just a little bit, so like 5% less YouTube, 5% more going out into the garden and just appreciating, the beauty of spring, to again, sustain ourselves and to develop this stronger platform of imperturbability based on sort of a indestructible cheerfulness, I guess we could say. So far, so good? Okay. So then he talks about, when other people disturb you, right? And this could be your partner, it could be your kid, it could be the boss at work, or a colleague or something. But when other people disturb you, again, he encourages us not to focus on that individual personally, but to understand, in a much broader contextual way, with using the notions of Buddhist philosophy, which is to say that everything arises or manifests due to causes and conditions, right? That they don't that nothing self arises. Everything is a product of environmental, situational causes and conditions, each of which also is based on sort of an infinite regress of causes and conditions. Yeah. And so when somebody is provoking you, Shantideva is encouraging us to kind of step back a bit and really try to understand more broadly, well, why? Why is this person acting this way? Why are they acting, and why am I reacting this way, right? Now, this is very challenging to do, as you know, because anger, when it comes, often comes, like a locomotive coming at you at 100 miles an hour. It's just like, somebody, steps on your toe and says something nasty to your face, and boom, you're there, right? And so this is like, well, how in the world do you possibly do this? How can you like step back and say, and do this sort of inquiry and this analysis of why is this person doing this, and why, and then looking more introspectively, why am I so upset by this? Why is this triggering me? Understanding the causes and conditions of the whole situation. And I have to say that kind of mental kung fu, that ability to, not just, so react so strongly, is almost entirely dependent on meditation. That this is this kind of thing. I mean, you don't need to, but yeah, you do. Actually, that the meditation, which is part and parcel of this, not only creating this cushion of cheerfulness, but also a sense of calm and clarity. Perhaps most importantly, is like this clarity of being able to be able to analyze, to actually use your higher brain functions rather than the reptilian emotional stuff, but to actually use your intelligence, right, to understand or to inquire, what are the causes and conditions? What, I mean, did the guy have, okay, here we are, it's 9 o'clock in the morning at work, and he's in my face, and you just kind of wonder, well, did he have an argument with his wife before he came into work? Whatever. I mean, you just kind of, when you're in relationship with people, you begin to understand how they tick, and you want to use that. You want to really understand what's going on, and focus again on the anger itself, and the provocation itself, and the causes and conditions for both, right? To try to understand what's really going on. And he has this beautiful line in here where he says, no one ever goes around thinking, I mean, generally, no one goes around thinking, well, now I'm going to be angry, right? Nobody has that thought, you know. People are provoked. Something happens that triggers them, right? And so there's space when we understand that people are being provocative due to causes and conditions. That is to say that in some sense they're being impelled to do it. They're not doing it voluntarily. You know, nobody really anger is not tasty, right? You know, there's so many other wonderful mental states that we can have, right? You know, like appreciation and joy and love and all those kind of things, right? Those are tasty. Those are nice. We like those. Nobody likes anger. I mean, it's just, it's like eating sand. It's just horrible, you know, yuck, you know, so nobody wants that. And so, so what you get maybe here is just little glimmers of the potentiality for compassion, to understanding. Oh, poor dear. Referring to yourself, you, the one who are, you know, the victim of the attack, and oh, poor dear, you who are impelled to provoke or to lash out at me in this way. And that is all due to causes and conditions. That is to say, it's not personal. It's not personal on his side, and it's not personal actually on your side either. Which is consistent with you know, this whole Buddhist notion of no self. There's no self there. All of this is all of these manifestations are expressions of causes and conditions, and not some essence. Yeah, either on the subjective side or on the objective side. Yeah, that is to say, and this is really this. You know, he goes into Shantideva goes into the whole discussion of prajna, or this wisdom quality that penetrates and sees that there is no self in terms of the subjective side, and neither is there an intrinsic essence to any phenomena out there either. And that instead everything is like a dream, utterly intangible, like a magical illusion, or like clouds, or a magic show, things like that. So it's all part of a whole teaching arc, right? The whole purpose of the text is to get us to that kind of prajna that sees that everything is insubstantial, or actually ultimately that it's neither substantial nor insubstantial, is not in any way characterizable by any label or conceptual mind. And that's true transcendent wisdom. That's where it's all going, right? But that kind of way of, or that approach is sort of permeates his whole discussion, including this presentation of patience and being able to overcome anger. And yeah, and then he talks about, you know, actually, everybody really wants to be happy. That's what really, you know, we really wish for that, right? Nobody wants to be angry. Nobody wants to be in toxic relationships. You know, nobody wants that. And yet it still happens, right? It happens a lot, right? And how can that be? And he talks about how actually, even though we all desire to be happy, we're not really very bright about it. You know, but there's a lot of confusion, or a lot of lack of clarity, or we could say brain fog, right? We're just really kind of dull about stuff. And particularly, we're dull about karma, cause, and effect. That what we are doing all too often that may be propelled by a wish for happiness actually are not wise actions. You know, like going to the YouTube thing for the 100th time of the day, or drinking the third glass of wine when 2 would have been just fine. That we do things. We're always seeking some kind of mental or physical pleasure, but our methodology, how we're going about it, maybe isn't so smart. And so there's a real, again, this more clarity level to understand that these negative situations where, Joe is getting in your face, he's driving you crazy, or the landlord is bugging you, or the wife is bugging you, or the dog, I don't know what it is, time to kick the dog. Anyway, that there's something really getting at you, that this is a result of your karma. That is the notion of what goes around comes around. This is a reflection back to you of your negative actions, right? That are now those negative actions that you've done in the past are now, because of this particular constellation of causes and conditions, are now showing up in the manifestation of this person who is giving you a very, very hard time. And that is to say, placing all blame on one source, right? Which is, again, the only one you can control. You have zero control over other people. So, and so the upshot, one of the logical upshots of that is, well, I don't want to have to go through toxic, angry situations. Well, dude, then what you need to do is to engage in more and more virtue and meritorious activity. Plant the seeds now of positivity, which all karmic actions will come to fruition at some point. So rather than planting negative seeds, which will mature as some sort of negative outcome, really focus more of your intention on, virtuous actions, being generous, being kind, being helpful, being a Boy Scout, all of those things, that are really positive. Those will actually come around, and it'll just get better and better. That is to say, to really, and this is so fundamental to Buddhist practice, actually, is to really appreciate and understand the notion of simple goodness, right? That people have by nature, a good heart. They may get educated out of it, right? But initially, we have, all of us, have a sense of connection, a sense of affection, warmth, and such. And the cultivating this sense of good heart, this sense of compassion, and then acting out of that, is going to lay the karmic seeds that will create a brighter future, right? With less toxicity coming. But then, when it does come, to recognize that this is a reflection of my own negativity coming back at me, and now I'm suffering because they just fired me or something, or I've been falsely. This is the one that drives me crazy. But I've been falsely accused, right? They say I did it, but I didn't do it. Somebody else did it, but they say I did it, and they're convinced, and I can't persuade them otherwise. That sort of stuff really burns me. I don't know about you, but it just burns me when that sort of stuff happens. You're blamed for something that is not really your fault. So it's coming back, and so you're suffering, and we can learn from the suffering, I guess. So, and one of the things he talks about is that suffering, it's a pain in the ass for sure, but on the other hand, it's actually really good because it softens our heart, right? And there's also this real strong theme in terms of the Bodhisattva's cultivation of compassion is to recognize that your suffering is so not unique or it's not so special. That is to say, everybody goes through the same stuff. The little sufferings as well as the big sufferings of great severe illness, or spouse is diagnosed with cancer, great loss that everybody, your suffering is not special, right? It is. When you're little, you think it's nobody. No, but actually, everybody has the same stuff. And so the cultivation, so the experience of our own, actually touching, and this is something we don't sometimes have been sort of conditioned not to do, but actually to fully taste, the suffering, and then letting that, soften us, and also, like I say, this more mature outlook that recognizes that everybody is has gone through these same kind of experiences. Develops this, this good and compassionate heart, which is so key to his presentation and Bodhisattva path in general. And then there's this other notion, you see this a lot in Patrul Rinpoche's writings too, which are largely rooted in Shantideva's approach, is to identify, to get clear on what they call the 8 worldly concerns, right? And so this is our personal concern about pleasure and pain. Our own personal concern about gain. Stock market is down because of tariffs. Stock market is up because no tariffs. This gain and loss thing, right? But again, it's all about me, right? It's my pleasure, my pain, my gain, my loss. It's all very self-centered, these 8 worldly concerns. My sense of having, an elegant reputation and being well thought of, or, just being Bobo Belinsky, the human zero. That is to say that I just have no significance at all. People just walk by and they don't even know that I exist. So that again, it's my good reputation or my lack of anyone even noticing. And then the idea of being praised or being blamed. And so what he says here is, says, look, if you're angry yourself, you can trace it back to one of the 8 worldly concerns. Someone has, like I was talking about earlier, someone has blamed you for something. You're at fault. You've been accused of being at fault. Or, someone has stolen. You come out one day and your car isn't where it's supposed to be. In fact, you look up and down the block and your car is nowhere to be seen. And so you're going through a rather disturbing experience of loss, right? Your car's gone and you can't even get to work on time, and wow, the anger just comes, boom, and yet you can't really focus it on anybody because, the car is gone and it's, south of San Leandro by now, so whatever, it's like gone. So, so it's very, very instructive, actually. What he's saying, he says, you want to get real clear on what these 8 worldly concerns are. And then whenever you have anger, you can connect the dots. It's one of those 8. And all of those 8 are all about me. I'm not getting what I want, or I'm getting what I don't. Where, by contrast, the path to Buddhahood is not about self-concern, but it is about bringing happiness to others. So, so he's encouraging us to learn about practice, about patience, develop the strength of heart that is not so easily thrown off. And as we do so, he says, well, eventually it's going to culminate in you becoming a Buddha for the benefit of all living beings. That's a win. Right? But long before that, if you develop this sense of patience and the strength of heart, that along the way, you're going to have a healthier life, you'll live longer, and you will be content. Right? And that's how he ends the chapter. Is, you really want to do this because it ultimately leads to the ultimate goodness of Buddhahood. But meanwhile, better health, longevity, and a sense of contentment. What could be better than that? Yeah. So that's it. And now, see, there must be, but wait, there must be objections. Truly, there must. This is your time to unmute yourself and say, Mark, come on. Or whatever. You're very sanguine. Everybody's happy. Yes. Try to speak really loud.
Okay, so is doing meritorious activities, is that an antidote to anger?
Okay, so the question is engaging in meritorious activity, is that an antidote to anger? Great question. So yes. That is to say, the engaging in meritorious activities. And so meritorious activities are positive actions, positive karmas that benefit others, that benefit the Dharma, that benefit the Sangha, making donations to the Sangha, for example. This is a meritorious activity. There are many kinds of meritorious activities. So, for example, we in the teachings of karma, we have these 10 negative actions, and the first one is killing, right? Killing an animal or something is a negative karma. It's a negative action. And then you have the 180-degree opposite of that, which is, well, instead of killing, you could instead be engaged in meritorious positive action that actually protects life, right? And so that's why you see in Buddhist circles, people who ransom the lives of animals, who are destined for the slaughterhouse, and they buy them, and then they go out and liberate them out into the hills, or they go down to the fish market, where they have live fish, and you buy some live fish and you take them out to, you go out along pier someplace and you put the fish back, and fish are happy, they get to go and do whatever they're going to do. So this, and it seems kind of funny until you actually do it. I haven't done it a lot, but I remember one time with Rinpoche's brother Lama Pega, when he used to work at Pemaling, right? And so we had rubbing elbows a little bit, and it came to and then there, in the Tibetan tradition, there's these sort of powerful times of the calendar, right? one of which is, the full moon day during the month of Sagadawa. This is the day of where we celebrate the birth of the Buddha and the enlightenment of the Buddha, and so forth. This full moon day is a really powerful kind of energetic time, and so that's the day that we did this. So we went downtown Oakland, into this fish shop with all this fish and crabs and whatnot, and put them in the back of the pickup truck, and then we drive to the Berkeley Marina and we put these things, back in the bay, and then we have pizza, out there at the park. That was really cool. You just have that again, it's very, very sort of intelligent. It's like, oh yeah, this is a super powerful day. This is a day to really remember the Buddha. And so then we do this meritorious action. And so it creates I think I'm just thinking, in terms of your question, it does two things. One, it strengthens that sense of cushion of cheerfulness and positive mindset, which protects you against anger. It's also laying down a very positive karmic action, right? Which will, have some sort of fruition later, in terms of the karma cause and effect. So, short answer, yes. Anybody else? Otherwise, I'll just read a couple of these verses. These are very nice. They're so beautiful to hear. So he starts off the chapter, verse 1. All the good works gathered in 1,000 ages, such as deeds of generosity, all these were meritorious things. All of these good works and offerings to the Buddhas, or to, like I was saying, to the Sangha. A single flash of anger shatters them. So he's like laying it out pretty strong, the destructive power of anger. And he says, no evil is there similar to anger. And there is no austerity to be compared with patience. So what he's talking about in terms of austerities, because, in Indian practice, Indian religious thinking, sometimes people would go through great hardships and austerities, right? They would, starve themselves and just eat little grains of rice now and then, or they'd sleep on a bed of nails, or walk on hot coals. They would mortify their bodies in various ways, right? And these were thought to be, really cool. But here he's saying, no, actually, the greatest austerity is patience. There is no austerity to be compared with patience. So steep yourself, therefore, in patience in various ways, insistently. Right? That is to say, this is a choice, right? Not to become angry, not to respond with anger, and insistently. That is to say, you're kind of making a contract with yourself. You're promising to yourself, I know how destructive anger is. Been there, done that. Don't want to do that anymore. So I'm not going to get angry, And so there's this sense of resolve. But there's also this, and it's like I say, and then you're sort of like forming a contract with yourself, and you don't want to let yourself down. You're trying to, but then he says insistently, steep yourself in patience insistently. Those tormented by the pain of anger never know tranquility of mind. Strangers they will be to every pleasure. They will neither sleep, right? When you're angry, you can't sleep. They will neither sleep, nor will they feel secure, because you're vulnerable. You're just like exposed, and this toxicity can get at you at any time. All these ills are brought about by wrath, our sorrow-bearing enemy. here again, like I was saying earlier, he's saying, look, the enemy here is to look at the anger itself as being the enemy. But those who seize and crush their anger down will find joy in this and future lives. Getting what I don't want, and all that hinders what I do want. In discontent, my anger finds its fuel. From this, it grows and beats me down. Therefore, I will utterly destroy the sustenance of my enemy, my foe who has no other purpose other than to hurt and injure me. So, therefore, it's all very logical. Come what may, I will not upset my cheerful happiness of mind. Right? He's making promises to himself. Dejection never brings me what I want. My virtue will be warped and marred by it. And then this is so mature. If there's a remedy when trouble strikes, if there's something that can be done to fix it, then what reason is there to be dejected? Get on with it. Do what you need to do to fix it. And if there isn't anything you can do, well, what use is there in being glum? There's nothing you can do about it, so let it go. So if there's something you can do about it, when the trouble strikes, if there's something you can do, do it. If there isn't, okay. Yes.
Could there be a circumstance when anger is the clarifying energy, when anger may bring about a positive result?
Okay. So to try to rephrase the question, because you guys may not be able to hear it so well, it isn't anger sometimes like the right response in the sense that it brings a certain clarity and a certain energy that's needed in a particular situation? So more or less?
Yes, and it serves as a vehicle for advocacy for oneself, to correct an injustice.
Right. Yeah. So that sort of this righteous anger that might be there that would could correct an injustice. That's yeah. So the energy of the sort of essence of anger does have a strong clarity aspect to it, and so now we're kind of talking on a different level than and you're talking also about this sense of, like, I'm sort of recharacterizing as this sort of righteous anger that is correct and seeks to correct a wrong or an injustice. Like, I'm really angry about the fact that some guy who was legally here in the United States, got kidnapped and sent to a prison in El Salvador, where if he stays there, he's not likely to survive. That's a horrible injustice, right? Everybody knows that. You would think. But it seems not to register with some people. But for ordinary people, that if you're here legally and you're picked up by mistake and you're sent not back to your own country, but actually to some other foreign country, into some prison. You're not just left out on the street, you're put into a prison. Anyway, it's crazy. So, yeah. And I'm just sort of, because he doesn't really talk, because actually the using the energy and the clarity energy of anger is more sort of Vajrayana level kind of discussion, and that's not what we're talking about here. But I think, and this is just me talking, that the energy, the clarity energy of that kind of anger is great, is deeply energizing, you know, and it can cause one to engage in very, very productive action, actually. But the if it's just reactive sort of anger, it's not likely to have a good result. But if you can tap into that energy and then use that energy in a constructive way, then one can effectuate a positive result. But that is it's very hard to do that and to be free of self-centered or self-concern. It's doable, right? There are levels of practice where that sort of thing does happen. But for what we're talking about here, which is more based on the teachings, the Buddhist teachings of the sutras, you're playing with fire, I guess, is the thing, is to recognize, you know, that, and again, it's sort of, you know, this is sort of current events. I mean, that for me, that injustice is just so striking, and so compelling, and so if that then translates, if that sense of injustice and that kind of clarity, energy, quality is then applied in a productive way, right? In taking, you know, real, you know, strong steps that will affect positive change. Great. Yeah. But if on the other hand, you know, it's just yet another thing that causes us to be upset and dejected about, you know, just how the degenerate age that we live in, and it just makes it, and it just brings us down. It's just one more thing that is depressing, and that's just, and then that's feeding into a negativity loop, right? And creating this sense of discontent and lack of equanimity and such. So one has to be very careful. That is to say, working with the raw energy of anger in a positive and productive way is doable, but you're playing with fire. You know, you really are. You're really grabbing the electrical wire. Yeah, and if you're really good meditator and really have, you know, really great skill, then it's doable. Generally, though, it's not likely to work out well. So there's no one answer to, no single answer here to your question. You see, we have in the Dharma these three different kind of ways of dealing with the negative emotions. Right? We have this sort of renunciation mind, a sort of foundational Buddhism, which really just does everything to keep the negative emotions at bay. To just turn your back on them in some way. And then you have this, which is more a bodhisattva approach of great compassion and the wish to become a Buddha for the benefit of all living beings, and applying various antidotes to the negativity, to the anger. And so one would cultivate feelings of appreciation and love, right? and as an antidote for the negativity of the anger. And then the third level is sort of this Vajrayana level, right? Which starts working with the energies as energies, the clarity energy of anger. So sort of the pure energetic essence, you could say, of anger is this clarity and is this tremendous energy, right? But like I say, until we're very well rooted in the bodhisattva level, we have to be very careful about pretending, that we're, some sort of realized being, and that we can, take the anger and use it productively. It's just a slippery slope, I guess is what I'm trying to say. And that, and this is lost on many people, many students, Western students of Dharma, because they jump to the higher teachings very, very quickly, right? And they don't spend enough time on cultivating the love, the sense of appreciation of the kindness of others, that we've experienced, and that all beings at one time or another have been our mothers and have shown us such kindness, and so forth, and cultivating this sense of immeasurable love, and then also this sense of compassion rooted in our own suffering, and recognizing that everyone else is going through the same sort of experiences, and developing this mahakaruna, or this great compassion for all beings, right? That part, many people, Western students, just sort of skip, like, oh, they're too smart for that. I want to go on to the Vajrayana stuff, and that's really problematic. That the cultivation of the bodhicitta, rooted in love and compassion, is a process of, like I say, developing this great appreciation of love for all beings, and this deeper, ever deepening sense of compassion for suffering of all beings, is a stage or level of practice that all too frequently, like I say, people who, I just want to do Dzogchen or Vajrayana or something like that, and that's really can turn into actually be very negative, actually. And so focusing on these bodhicitta practices, like this bodhicharyavatara of Shantideva, and really working with it in a thoroughgoing way is really important. And I'm noticing that our time is quickly running. So I just want to say that this patience chapter is chapter 6, I think. It's only one of 10. So the book is really wonderful. And Hugh Joswick and I are going to teach the whole thing this summer, all 10 chapters. And so if you're interested in learning more about Shantideva and his text, this is the one I would recommend. There's got to be 10 different translations of the Bodhicharyavatara out there, but this is the one that I think is the very best at this point. This is under the title of The Way of the Bodhisattva, which is the revised translation by the Pemakkara Translation Group. So it wants to be from 2008 or later. You don't want the first version. First version is pretty good, but this revised version is way better in many ways. So That's the version that we're going to use. And then also just dealing with this chapter 6 and going much more deeply into the practice of patience. There's this other book which doesn't deal with the Bodhicharvatara as a whole, but just deals with the patience chapter alone. And that's this one, which is called Peaceful Heart, the Buddhist Practice of Patience. And this is by Zigor Kongtrul. And it's a real deep dive. Yeah. And it's really well done. And it's basically a commentary with practices on almost every verse. So it's very thorough, very deep, and really quite excellent. So, yeah. Well, thank you for patiently listening. I hope you got something out of it. Yeah. Anyway, try to as much as possible to just like forest fires, they need little needles. You need to rake up the needles. You need to get rid of. You need to have this sense of cheerfulness, a positive, cheerful outlook. And he says, you make this resolve or promise to yourself, so let nothing disturb my sense of cheerfulness, as like I say, sort of a buffer against anger. And then also to really look more analytically and to not just respond emotionally so much, and to really try to understand. There's got to be a reason, right, for this person to be doing this. Like the one that I hate was when they don't respond to your email. You send an important email and they don't, they just like ghost you, right? And then you send a second one because it's like really important and they still ghost you, right? Oh my God. So you have to ask yourself, why are they doing that? There's got to be a reason. Think about it. Yeah. So to understand the causes and conditions of why people are behaving the way they are, there may be things going on that you're not aware of, and you need to find out about it. To understand and to approach things differently after you've sort of analyzed it. Anyway, the sense of cheerfulness, this more analytical approach, and then this just overarching sense of recognizing that anger is so very, very destructive. Absolutely, it's just absolutely poison, relationships, and so you just don't see those people anymore. That's me. Doesn't have to. Anyway, thank you all so much for coming, and I wish you all the very best. Thank you so much.